All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Cassie said, my name is Andy Kellner. I work in what's called our depredation program with the Wildlife Bureau. It's just kind of a fancy way of saying wildlife conflict and wildlife damage management. And I'm actually thrilled to kind of be taking a break from what my summer usually eats up. I'm up here in Spirit Lake doing deer visits and crop fields right now. And so taking a break to talk about geese is something that's actually kind of exciting. And I could go on way too long about geese. And so condensing this down into a lunch and learn type thing is always a little bit of a challenge. So I do definitely look forward to questions coming out of this, or at the beginning here and at the end, my contact information will be up there. And I'm happy to discuss specific cases or talking about certain areas or any future questions anytime. So please feel free to reach out, email, phone, text, whatever I guess is your preferred choice. But with that, let's dive into it. Um, I always like to start any sort of wildlife management conversation with kind of let's give some background of where we're trying to stand. It's really easy to come into something with either somebody being absolutely in love with the wildlife or somebody absolutely upset with it. So I like to at least, kind of set some ground rules, if you will, or let you know this is where we're coming at it from. And so you can see our mission up there and in the bottom point about balancing things. But to me, one of the most interesting parts in North America, there's several key points. But remembering that wildlife belongs to everybody is something that can be really hard to wrap your head around, especially when you're dealing with frustrating information on property that either you own or manage. And taking that step back to remember, hey, this, like, it's not the states, it's not the federal governments, it's everybody's. And especially with waterfowl, you're talking about something that moves across not only state borders but also international borders. So some extra hurdles come into place when we're talking about management for that sort of thing, but that doesn't mean we're not without options. I also really appreciate this graph. If anybody knows Dr. Adam Janke at Iowa State University, he put this together when he must have been deep down a rabbit hole and thought on how the ways of the world working. But this is really kind of a good framework to be getting your mind into and to be thinking about, is this worth getting exasperated about, or is there some actions that I can take, or am I overreacting? It's a little bit comical, but I think at the end of the day, there's some really important key points here. One of those is exclusion. Now, for a bird, obviously with wings, exclusion can certainly be difficult, but we're going to get into that a little bit more with geese because it's not as impossible as you might think. But then after that, looking at habitat, the environment, that's where this animal wants to live or can live. And can we do something about that to shape that in a way that's maybe not as attractive for those specific wildlife, in this case, geese? So just some of this, again, it's to lighten the mood a little bit, but also to be thinking about what are the things we can actually be doing here. And it works for trying to prevent something, or for you can take it the opposite way as far as attracting something. Now, when we're talking about water, you're talking about the intersection of some other form of habitat, whether it's a forest, prairie, agriculture, urban landscape, and meeting a new habitat type. So you're talking about a boundary issue. So a lot of edge species are going to be attracted to it. All species on this world need some level of water. So there's going to be some level of attractant there, but it's home to a lot of different species too. So whether we're talking about otters or beavers, about kingfishers, chorus frogs, you name it, there's a lot of animals that call this system home. So to expect no wildlife to use a water body that you're managing, that's not an okay place to start. You're just going to be frustrated from the get-go because there are animals that are going to live there. And of course, one of those is geese. I think it's important in the story of Canada geese in this country, and especially in Iowa, to take just a minute to talk about where have we come from to get to where we're at. There's a number of wildlife species in Iowa today that I think a lot of professionals would tell you are a conservation success story. Canada geese rank way up on top of that. So Canada geese, historically, if you go back a few hundred years ago, they were throughout almost all of North America. They were definitely in Iowa. They were nesting all over in Iowa, especially in the northern and north central and down to central areas of Iowa, which is what we would call the prairie pothole region. It's that, basically think of Des Moines as the very southern tip of that. That's the area where that last big glacial event came and made that rolling habitat that was prairie up top and then a water body or wetland down below. That mix of uplands and water is prime for ducks and geese and those sorts of things. And the areas that are still in the prairie pothole that haven't been completely either plowed over or drained, like up in Canada or the Dakotas, still are considered the waterfowl factories of the United States of America. It's prime. Well, people came in, they started draining wetlands, channelizing rivers, incorporating agriculture into the landscape. And then with that, on the other side of it, there was unregulated hunting going on. There was a lot of market hunting going on. There was egg collecting for subsistence living. There was a lot of pressures all at once on these populations to the point that geese were no longer nesting in Iowa. They were completely gone. And so it took a pretty phenomenal effort over time to actually kind of change that. And there's a timeline where there was efforts by the Iowa Conservation Commission, so that was before the DNR, to actually bring geese back into the state. Many other states were doing this at the same time. It involved translocation efforts of moving potential nesting pairs out to places that were protected to have them nest, and then be able to let that wild pair of geese out with their hatched young. So then those young would imprint on that area and then return to that next year. And it was actually remarkably successful. And so you kind of see the timeline there that we fast forward to the 90s, and we had nesting pairs in each county in Iowa that were recorded. In here, special note in case you're not catching it, we had it was the Conservation Commission and later the DNR had requests from cities to release geese in urban areas, and that did not happen from the state side. There were some that went through steps kind of outside of the process, and I think like Cedar Rapids would be a good example, where somehow they got their hands on geese and brought them there and released them there. That was not state sanctioned. It wasn't DNR, because we were worried about exactly what a lot of us are frustrated about today actually happening. So that's an interesting tidbit in the middle of all that. So I'm a visual person. I like looking at graphs and things. Maybe you guys are or not, but this helps me. And also just noting that this is all within a lifetime. This is within one of our generations, where we went from 0 geese to now, over the last decade, 12 years, the population has been fairly steady. We would expect any wildlife population to do ups and downs through time, and we're certainly seeing that with geese. Now, I think there'd be an argument to be made that we might be seeing a shift in the distribution of where geese are calling home because of where they're finding good habitat and where they feel protected. And so I think that we might be seeing more distributed in urban areas than maybe out in rural areas. We see that from a combination of just observations, but also where are we receiving complaints from, where do field staff have to respond. So we are seeing a little bit of a difference there in distribution, I think. But overall, it's pretty steady. The population is steady. We're not increasing drastically anymore like we were through the 80s and 90s. We're at a more stable level for sure. So just a quick recap. Goose were here. Geese were here. Geese are gone. Geese are back. And geese tend to be this interesting, either you love them or hate them type thing. Now, they're an important recreational source for hunters and those sorts of things. But there are certainly areas where they can be problematic. But we encounter a lot of people that just love geese for the sake of geese being geese too. So that's where we've been. That's where we're at. So the question comes up to, okay, so geese are here, but why right here? Why right in this spot? And that's where I enjoy getting the chance to play wildlife detective on these phone calls, where I get to actually go out there and walk alongside folks that are calling me concerned about the numbers of geese. And we get to go, okay, well, let's see what the clues tell us. So water is the first thing, right? If there's water, you're going to be attracting certain wildlife components, like I covered. And waterfowl, no surprise here, they're associated very strongly or reliant on water. So just having a water feature in general is going to attract some level of waterfowl. Now, with geese specifically, there's a couple things that they really like. One of those things is wide open sight distances. They want to be able to see a long ways looking for predators and threats, and that also gives them a longer area for landing or takeoff, essentially. So if they have a wide open area that it's easy for them to take a few running steps and get started and then take off, or landing is easier because they don't have to dive into just a little, nook. They like that, but more they like the wide open space to watch for predators and threats. Next, that circle on the right hand side there is access to and from the water. So a lot of times the issues, and when we're getting phone calls, is geese either in the spring or early summer. So we're talking nesting geese, where maybe they're aggressive because they have a nest there, or it's the mess from a big family group or a couple family groups in one spot. And for those specific dynamics, the geese like really easy access from the water to the grass. The grass is the food, the water is the safety. And so if they find a spot where their goslings will be able to walk to and from that water easily, they're going to like it. That's going to attract geese. And so in this instance, it's a little bit blurry, but you have a pair of geese on the right-hand side, and they've got a few youngsters with them, and they can easily walk right down that slope. It's mowed all the way down there. It's super simple for them to just walk right up into the grass, which is a preferred grazing space for them. Also, it always makes me laugh when we walk up or we're walking by a water body and we have something like this where these birds ran over to us. They came right to us. Food is the number one attractant for wildlife. Wildlife are always in survival mode, and they're always looking for their next meal because that means life or death. If we're feeding or somebody else is feeding geese in the area, we can do everything else right, and that's going to ruin it. We should never be feeding wildlife like this. It artificially congregates them in the area. It's most of the things we're giving them are not healthy, and we could potentially lead to disease spread. Avian influenza has been in the news a lot lately. We don't want to create scenarios where we're even accidentally spreading something like that, right? Reduce feeding, get rid of feeding, put up signs so people don't feed. Find somebody to go out there and shake their finger at them to tell them to stop feeding, whatever you got to do. Just for the love of all, just stop feeding the geese. That's a big message for us. And then also the food source itself. You go into urban areas and it's all this manicured grass that's fertilized, it's coming up, those young shoots. It's what they're looking for. Now, geese are really interesting. I talked about them being a resource that travels across lines, right? So we've done some studies in the Des Moines metropolitan area, specifically with geese, where we were able to put GPS collars on them with the help of a grad student at Iowa State University. And we found out some really interesting stuff. So as part of my work, if there's geese that are nesting in a very inopportune place, we have a federal permit to come in and do some hands-on work like a nest removal. We were curious to see, where do the adult birds go if we remove a nest? And so we were actually able to go in and capture hens in these predicaments that were nesting in a spot that was not good. We're talking like right by the entrance of a building, something like that, where they were attacking people coming and going. Get our hands on that female. We would put a collar on her that had a GPS pack and a solar frame on it. And we would let her go, but then we would remove the nest with this federal permit. And it was fascinating to find out that Des Moines birds, local birds, were actually traveling up to 1,800 miles in June, all the way up to the western side of Hudson Bay. There were some birds that were pushing up close right on the Arctic Circle, and they spent their whole summer up there before coming back in September. It was absolutely fascinating. So here's just kind of some of the hurdles because they're an international resource that we know travels, even Des Moines birds up into Canada, comes back, go to other states. We know this. They're managed at a federal level. In order to do anything outside of or to do any sort of handling, hands-on work, or anything that would be a lethal management technique outside of hunting seasons, you have to have a federal permit, which we in the state of Iowa hold for the DNR. And if there's situations that call for it, we come in. But in the meantime, the big things we're looking at is the habitat and any harassment that we can do to make the area uncomfortable for the birds. Those are the starting points. And then we can add on from there if we need to. But we need to make sure we're not attracting more birds in there. I could come in with a permit and remove every nest around the pond, but if the habitat doesn't look any different and it's still attractive to birds, then all we're going to do is draw in more birds and you're going to repeat the cycle. That's not fair to the natural resource, and it's not fair to time management for personnel, and also for the people that are calling in the first place with the concerns about too many geese. We're giving them a false sense of hope. So you got to do something deeper, but we're willing to help and walk alongside you along the way and give all sorts of different tactics. So first of all, I have no idea who made this sign. I would have thought they had known that waterfowl was one word if they were a biologist. It's okay. I won't get too judgmental. But this goes to that low-hanging fruit again. I cannot stress it enough. I worked with the city of Des Moines to implement a feeding ban. Yes, it may not have a difference overnight, but putting something out there and to start getting the conversation going that we should not be feeding these animals because of so many reasons. But at the end of the day, you're going to make some people angry, and the wildlife, that natural resource, is walking away, gaining that nuisance label, which is just, it's going to make it look like less in everybody's eyes. And so that is really important to me, that we don't do that to those animals. There is a lot that we can do with landscaping. And now some of you might be out in more rural, natural settings, but some of you are certainly in urban settings. And managing the habitat is definitely a doable thing. You'll have some people express concerns about, oh, it's going to look weedy or it's going to look bad. It does not have to. And I personally am a big fan of pollinator gardens and prairies, but there's other ways of doing it too. If you want to step it up a little bit, make it look a little bit nicer. This example of a place that I really love it. It's a little bit tougher to see it. And I should have I have another picture from looking down on a building next to this. But so there's a beach just at the end of the natives or the planting here. And what they did with their docks is they actually set them up in a perimeter around the outside of the beach area, which puts in that exclusion. It puts a barrier right in place for those geese where they're not comfortable approaching by water up to the beach. So that's a huge win. Then they've got this nice landscaping all along the shoreline, and that's providing a visual barrier so they can't see as far. Yes, they can walk through it, but it just makes it that much more hesitant of a first step for them to take when they can't see what's on the other side. Geese also, they go through a period, those adult birds, when they shed all of their flight feathers all at once. It's called molting with birds. They shed a feather and regrow it just like we do with hair. Geese are really unique that those adults shed all of their flight feathers at once. And that's to line up with when their youngsters are running around on the ground before they've developed their feathers. So there's a period of time in the summer, usually starting in June and going through part of July, where basically all the geese are flightless. If you start thinking about that, remembering it, you'll go, hey, you know what? I didn't see very many geese flying around in June or July. They were still there, but they were walking everywhere. So if you do something with the landscaping to make it difficult for them to walk between areas, then that's a huge hurdle for them and they don't like it as much. So if you're talking about a shoreline, we're talking large caliber or diameter riprap. Here, this person did something a little bit fancier with these landscaping blocks and limestone blocks. And then they have the bushes on the back side of it. So again, it's a visual barrier as well as a movement barrier, which is a wonderful combination to look at. There's a pond just off the screen here. And one other little story about this, some level of wildlife use is to be expected, right? I love this pond because, yeah, people complained. There was one pair of geese there, and they had a family. This neighbor had figured out how to keep them from coming into their yard in a natural way. But the other thing that was phenomenal, when I was there, the geese can be very territorial towards each other. And this one small pond, that mating pair, they wanted that pond all to themselves. And while I was walking the perimeter, they chased off two other pairs of geese that were coming in, whether they were just coming in for a drink of water or to actually think about nesting there. That pair chased them off. If you can be comfortable with having one pair of geese and they do the work for you, count that as a win. Like that's a yes, it's geese. They can make a little bit of a mess when they're eating all that grass in the summer, but it's I would rather have one pair of geese than five different families, which each of them having 4 to 6 young. Here's some more examples of things you can do along that shoreline. That's an example of rocks, or it could be a little bit more industrialized riprap. But they obviously only had so much space between that walkway, right? And so that was successful. Here in the upper right, using some native grass plantings, it doesn't have to be like all the way from the edge of the water all the way up to the trail. You can still have some space in there. And sometimes I get the question about, okay, well, what about the fishermen? They want to get down to the water. Well, you can certainly cut a trail. You're making a possible route for geese. But if you're creative with how you mow it and do it in either like a squiggle pattern or a diagonal where there's not a clear sight line straight through it, that would work. But even in this instance, this helped. It maybe didn't solve everything, but it made enough of the geese more uncomfortable, so they were less likely to call that home. At the end of the day, if you want to put a fence, that will solve all the issues. It may not be feasible in your areas, but definitely keep that in the back pocket. That's something you can certainly do. Again, geese can fly, right? But not when they're with their youngsters. Those adults do not want to leave their young, and they lose their flight feathers in June. If they can't easily walk to it, they're not going to go there. So a fence can be remarkably useful. And I've even seen instances where a single strand of rope at about 10 or 12 inches can help, or maybe even deter them enough that they'll go on to the next neighbor if you don't like your neighbor too much. These are just some other examples where there could be geese in this upper picture, keeping that water open. If you had a big group of geese, migrating geese coming through, a couple hundred of them, they'll keep a pocket open and not let it freeze in the winter so that they can keep using it. Well, they didn't want to with this just because they didn't know what was on that shoreline. They couldn't see. They didn't feel as comfortable about it. On that bottom picture, you have that combination of riprap, although I would choose more of a large caliber without the small stuff mixed in there necessarily, and then taller vegetation. It can look like a lot of different things. It can actually be quite aesthetically pleasing. But it still comes with some different management, just like lawn mowing would. In the end, it would actually be cheaper than lawn mowing. Harassment or aversive conditioning is that negative stimuli to try to scare them out of there. Propane cannons in a lot of areas aren't going to be, that's that one in the upper left. They can be effective in the short term, but they are very loud and they can cause neighbor issues because they are very loud. So that's not always the best case. But if you're out away from building sites or homes, it could certainly be useful. I would do harassment like February, March, before the birds have nested, when they're just thinking about nesting. Try to scare them out, make it unpleasant then, and then that will help you later in the year. As long as they're not actively sitting on eggs, then you can be harassing them, and it's perfectly legal as long as you're not hurting them or handling them. On the right-hand side, that's just a launcher with either bangers or screamers. It's like a starter pistol for track competitions. You shoot it up into the air, it sends that out over the geese, and then it'll go boom or it'll scream its way out there. They really don't like the loud noise. It mimics a gunshot, or the scream is just an unnatural noise. This bottom thing is a fancy laser. And I know it's an opportunity for my Star Wars geekiness to come out, but it's for real. Birds' eyes do not like the wavelengths of lasers. Now, this is in an agricultural setting with like blackbirds and whatnot. There'll be settings with blueberry farms or vineyards where they actually have these programmable lasers that'll sweep in a pattern and it'll keep birds moving off of there. It might not solve it completely, but it keeps them moving and agitated, and then other things can work better. I've had a lot of success with geese from the ground using a handheld laser. I even had one in the winter where it was out by the Casey's headquarters there off of I-35. And I was working with another person. He went it was in the middle of the winter. It was the only open water around. And of course, a lot of birds there with the airport right next door, which isn't a good mix. He went out with just a laser, whereas I went out into the field just north of Casey's where the birds were feeding, even though it was getting later into the night. Um, Anybody that's familiar with the area, the car dealerships right there, so it's lit up when there's snow cover, like it's the middle of summer. But so I went out with bangers and screamers and was shooting off pyrotechnics, whereas he went out there with just the laser. And he went out, did 2 sweeps with the laser. They all flew off. And then I was chasing him around for a half hour out in that field through the snow. He was way more successful with just that laser. It can work remarkably well. Also, we have to remember hunting. So hunting, yes, it's a recreational opportunity. There's people out there that want to do it at this day and age. Geese are about the most sought after, or at least most harvested waterfowl in the state of Iowa. It also acts as an extreme form of harassment. If you utilize early hunting seasons, and around the metro, there's the special earlier Metro Canada goose season, which has started this last Saturday and with a higher bag limit. And we've done studies doing recoveries of leg bands that we put on birds, have actually found that those birds are harvested. Those city birds are harvested at the similar rates as the rest of the state. So it's telling us that season is effective. If there are places where hunting can occur, this is something you should seriously consider about implementing. Yes, of course, there's concerns about liability, which really shouldn't be a concern because as long as you're not charging to hunt, Iowa code is clear that the landowner is not responsible for the liability if somebody gets hurt. Also, I would point out that the number of hunting injuries in any given year is remarkably low. It really is a very safe thing. It's a wise use of the resource because you have people actually utilizing the animal. And if you're strategic about which seasons you're using, you can actually be targeting those local birds with that. And we know that adult geese, they can be very long lived. And actually hunting is one of the few things that can directly impact those populations, maybe more so than other populations of wildlife. So we've proven that pretty well. So be seriously considering hunting options, and you get to go outside with your dog. So that's always a wonderful thing. So I want people to be thinking big picture about this stuff, about all the different things you can be doing, from the managing the actual habitat that you have placed on the ground that is attracting the wildlife in the first place, to other attractants like food that might be out there, and then also looking at harassment or hazing or exclusion and those things that you can be doing on the ground there, and incorporating hunting where you can too, because that's a wonderful management tool. You start combining all of these things, and it can be remarkably successful what you can have happen in an area. I've seen quite a bit of success in some places. I was just talking about hunting. I was working, now it's not Polk County, but I worked with a conservation officer up in Sioux City in Woodbury County. And there's a golf course just on the south side of town, closer to Sergeant Bluff. And they were having goose issues for a number of years. Well, we worked with a local Delta waterfowl chapter. We got veteran hunters out there. We got the okay from the city, even though it was inside city limits, to hold a hunt. We did it during the earlier hunting season. We only harvested 8 birds, but those guys were thrilled for the opportunity to go out, and they didn't have geese show up again for 2 years. And they were able to then go back through the process and manage it at a much lower level. Just that pressure, they recognize hunting pressure and change their patterns very quickly. So there are all those different steps. And like I said at the beginning too, if we implement those things and we're not seeing that needle move, there is the federal permit, and we can do things like nest manipulations and go that route and see if that extra boost can help in a situation. But relying on this stuff first to make sure that it can be incorporated after any of those things happen, or that there's other positive ways we can do it that's going to be a little bit more relatable and understood by the public, are the first steps that we want to take. Not to say that there aren't other things that need to be done too. So that's the bulk of what I have covered today. But I would enjoy any questions if you want to post any of those things. But like I also said, please take down my information. And if there's specific areas that you're having concerns or issues, our staff would be happy, or myself, to come out, meet with you, look at what's going on, and see if we can't get something a little more customized to specifically what you're looking at.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. Lots of good tips there. So, yes, if you have any questions, please type them out in the chat and I will go ahead and read them. We have one so far. We have some places where we are having a lot of trouble getting seed established around our stormwater wetlands and ponds. What are some of the best ways to make that happen?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. That's you can be doing all the right things, and then Mother Nature or the geese themselves can really throw a wrench in that. So I think it is good to plan ahead. As much as we can, I would recommend excluding new seedings from the geese. Geese love new young shoots. Well, if you're going to put plugs or something like that out there in a seeding, that really is going to draw their attention when everything's short. It's going to stand out, and they could have a big impact on that. There's not necessarily much we can do about water level. We get a flooding year like this year, and that's going to cause havoc with any seeding. The other thing I would recommend, and I didn't put it in the general presentation because I recommend it for certain scenarios. It's not a best fit for everything, but there are labeled repellents that can be very successful with geese. It actually relies on a grape extract. It's called methylantranilate, and you would apply that to whatever the geese would be grazing on. Now, with any repellent that's a surface repellent like that, of course, if there's rain, if there's extended exposure to sunlight, it's going to start breaking down, or it might wash away and you have to reapply. That's why I I hesitate with bringing it up initially, because for a big area, it's going to be way too costly. But if there's specific seedings or specific areas where you don't want the geese to go, it can be really successful. Apply it to that. Be ready to reapply every couple of weeks, and then I would also incorporate those other things with it. But that can help save a lot of headaches in the end if you do that immediately, because that's going to force the geese to go somewhere else to find food sources.
All right. Are there any other questions? Go ahead and type them in. Let's see. What about areas where they loaf and it's just bare ground? So exclusion with a fence?
Yeah, that, or one of the things I should have included in there, I had the one picture of the dog with hunting. I've had a lot of success with folks, and actually I work with a nuisance wildlife control operator in central Iowa, a couple of them that do goose hazing specifically, and they use dogs. If this is either in a park setting or something like that, or there's neighbors nearby, that somebody, or maybe a park manager, if they could bring their dogs out and have them run through there, chasing the geese away. Again, you're not harming the birds. You're chasing them away. Perfectly legal. I would combine it with other hazing. But then if you actually have a live dog out there occasionally that can run out there, chase the ball into the middle of them, whatever, then you can utilize these folks put like dog silhouettes or coyote decoys out there. Again, this is one where it can work. I don't put it in my general presentation because I've seen it go really wrong. If you just throw a dog silhouette out there and don't do anything else, it's not going to work. It might work for a couple days, but then the geese will get used to it and go up there. But if you incorporate it with a live dog out there, and then you put out a coyote decoy or dog silhouettes too, then that might really help with that specific area. But once they are scared of using the general area, I would put up exclusion to keep them out of it so they don't come back and you're not starting over.
Related to that question, do scarecrows work to deter geese?
Um, yes and no. Again, if something sits out there and is too stagnant, any wildlife will figure out that that's not real, right? And you have to be careful if geese are already using an area. So let me give you an example from up here in northwest Iowa. There was a golf course. There was it was hot. It was during the summer, and the birds were all going to one spot underneath a tree that they would loaf and eat the grass. Well, the golf course went out there and put dog silhouettes. Right, they put two of them out there, try to scare the geese away. They didn't do anything else. Well, the geese were already going there. They were already used to it. The silhouettes never moved. So then once the golf course realized they had to move the silhouettes, they moved them. Well, the geese were so used to them at that point that the geese followed them. So then every time they moved the dog silhouettes, the geese just moved to where the dog silhouettes were put. It was like, no, like you got to be kidding me. So you got to do something else too. Scarecrow can work, but it's got to be able to move, go around, and you got to combine like noise or something else with it. Some of these Halloween decorations that are motion activated and make awful noises, and heck, they scare me. Those work with wildlife too. So incorporating something like that could be effective.
Any other questions? All right, not seeing any other questions. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to everyone that tuned in. Once again, this is being recorded. So if you want to see the link and share it with others, just send me an email and I'm happy to share that with you. And everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.